to be like, all right, we're going to try the strength conditioning thing. We're going to give it a whirl. So if you're a strength coach and somebody walks in with like 3 or 4 gymnasts, what are your big rocks instead of programming that you feel like you need to really start that 6-12-week program on?
Yeah, to start it off, I think number one for me, especially for female gymnasts, is going to be sprinting. So really starting to put some groundwork down on sprint technique. And that doesn't necessarily mean we go out into the gym right away and we start sprinting. Onto a track or wherever, because gymnasts, they sprint a lot. But I think one of the things that could be gymnasts I found can benefit from sprint technique is the sense, on a vault runway, if they're running in a straight line at a constant speed, that's a repeatable speed every time without, some deviations left to right because of something that's happening with a technical issue, or an arm is swinging, differently one stride to the next. That's going to be huge for vaulting. So I think that sprint technique is one of the things that I really cue in on. So, we start really, really easy there. We start with like wall drills. We start with, static sprint type drills. We start with some really easy, like rudimentary type track drills, like marches and skips and that's the type of stuff. And I think that's for me, it has been really, really helpful in kind of ingraining some speed technique. So speed would be one of the big rocks. And then the other one, and I touched on it a little bit, is just really getting those major patterns ingrained without causing a bunch of soreness. So squatting. And again, I talked about goblet squats, but you can regress that further to, whether it's a landmine squat or an assisted squat where you have, you're using maybe a TRX or something to really help them get some squat pattern and squat depth without, incorrect technique, whether it's at the knees or the back or something like that. Hip hinging technique. So again, looking at dumbbell RDLs or dumbbell single leg Romanian deadlifts as two of the kind of early ones that are easy to do with very little weight, and just, getting the balance and the actual hip hinge versus a hinge somewhere else up the back or something along those lines. And then some simple push pull type patterns, right? So, it might gymnasts do tons and tons of push-ups, as we all know. Very few of them do a great job at doing push-ups, in my experience. So again, if they're going to come in and see me, I'm not going to have them do hundreds of push-ups the way that, unless they do them well, then, whatever. But a lot of times I've seen there be some issues, with whether it's flared elbows or shoulders up by ears, starting to repattern that stuff so that when they go to the gym and do their push-ups, they're doing them in a way that's a lot healthier for the shoulders. So that those 4 patterns, kind of the push, pull, squat, and hip hinge. And then the final one, which I didn't mention yet, which I should have mentioned right around the speed piece, is probably jumping and landing mechanics. I really cue in early on especially landing mechanics, because it's another thing that, the sport of gymnastics, it's jumping like all day, every day. So again, I don't need to come in and do, at least I don't think with most new gymnasts that come into the weight room, we don't need to do extensive amounts of plyos right off the bat. Like, they're going to be doing that at the gym anyway. But what I like to try to do is reinforce some landing mechanics, with really simple things like box drops or snap downs. I like to do a lot of single leg landing mechanics, especially. So we'll use like mini hurdles, like 6-inch mini hurdles, to do some static jumps where they just kind of jump over the hurdle, stick the landing, the knee's not wobbly anymore, the foot, you have a good posture within the foot. And then that's repeatable. And once that's repeatable, we kind of move on to, instead of static, repeated, then we kind of raise the height and so on. So there's a progression in place for those things as well, in terms of jumping / plyometric type movements.
How did you guys navigate, that conversation around, like, are we doing too much? Is it not enough? Is what we're doing in the gym helpful? If not, like, what were your markers of progress, or maybe having to pivot a little bit when you guys were doing stuff together?
Yeah. So this was, there was lots of really good stuff early on. I would try now, just with the way that my contract or my overall job landscape looked like back then, it was my time with gymnastics at the beginning was pretty limited. So I would try to get to the gymnastics gym at least once a month, to sit in and watch practice, hang out with Dave and see what was going on. Dave was also really good at shooting emails back and forth when he thought that was needed, but he was really good with, he trusted Ellie and he trusted me. So I think that the biggest thing was Ellie and I had a really good back and forth communication, and Dave would be good at passing messages through Ellie. If Ellie was feeling tired, like, initially I was doing logging and monitoring with Ellie well before I was doing it on the national level. And, you know, if things popped up in the logging, it was really easy to chat with Ellie, and, you know, maybe we're going to pull back a little bit here or something along those lines. The other thing that I did from an early time now, I used to use, so I've been using force plates for a pretty long time to monitor, you know, jump metrics. And when I first was doing this, I was really only doing it with Ellie and like two of the kind of Olympic hockey players I was working with, because I had to basically by hand calculate the metrics I was getting out, which was
long division.
Kind of sad. Yeah, I had actually I was proud of my spreadsheet at the time until I realized that if I just paid a little bit more money, it'll all happen instantaneously. So anyway, we've gone down that road, but there's been a few metrics like, you know, jump height, reactive strength index from a counter movement jump, stiffness, those types of things, those types of metrics we've been monitoring for a pretty long time to get an idea physically how things are going. And the other piece, like we talked about the sprinting, I probably have 3 years of weekly sprint times for Ellie. From, I would say, 2013 to 2016, we were pretty heavy into monitoring 20-meter sprints with a 5-meter fly at the end, and we'd get an idea for top speed there. And, you know, we would kind of know, and through our meetings with Dave, we would know where we were in the yearly training plan. We would know if we were in a period of you know, planned kind of overreaching, I guess is a good way to put it. We would know if she was supposed to be tired, and if those speeds were down or the jump metrics were down, you know, we were okay with it because that was something that had to happen in order to stimulate growth.
What you feel your role is in filling in the gaps there, like whether it's like things that you're planning, movements you're doing, or where you find, okay, Dave can handle this, I'll handle this.
Yeah, I think that's that's a pretty, well, I don't know if it's an easy one, but it's something that I've come to a pretty solid understanding over the last bunch of years. And, you know, when I first tell people that are maybe involved in strength conditioning or involved in, you know, personal training or something along those lines, you know, the first thing they say when they hear that I work with gymnastics is, oh, you must do like tons of strength endurance and core and that sort of stuff. And I'm like, I do pretty much none of that because they do that all day, every day. Yep. Right. So, I mean, we talked a little bit about what the big rocks are at the very beginning of the programming. So now, you know, having worked with Ellie for 8 years or 9 years, you know, the big rocks are things that she doesn't do in the gymnastics gym. So it's really along like the kind of maximal strength lines, like making sure she maintains a decent level of maximal strength. Because again, that's something that's not going to happen. Like, you know, you're not going to deadlift 250 pounds. Now, not that everyone has to deadlift 250 pounds or anything, but it's something that, you know, we've kind of seen as a bit of a KPI for us in terms of just maintaining a good level of strength that's going to support her from a injury prevention, speed, power standpoint.
Yep.
And then a little bit more on the kind of this loaded power side. So we chatted a bit about this. Like, we don't do any Olympic lifting or anything along those lines. We might do a bit of Olympic style things, but more in like a landmine. So, you know, a little bit more control, you know, no barbells overhead or anything like that. And then some trap bar or hexagon bar, like jump work to get that loaded power stuff that we're doing. And again, that was something that we started doing, you know, 4 or 5 years after we started working together. So, you know, slow cooking the process is definitely a thing. And then,
okay, what are the KPIs, the key performance indicators for these athletes to know we're making sport specific progress? And I think that is exciting in terms of like people like yourself, like me, like Dan Lonsdale in the UK, who are kind of tip of the spear on maybe innovating a little bit and figuring out like, okay, what does the science say? What do the athletes say? And we're kind of giving people some guidance on kind of what to focus on. But at the same time, it's exciting because there's in my opinion, there's so much performance benefit left on the table because we don't use the best of both worlds traditionally and also with gymnastics. So I don't know, any thoughts on that kind of stuff before we dive in the next one?
I think, well, it brought up something for me. Like, I remember when I first started working with gymnastics, one of the first things that I do is, you know, dive into the literature a little bit and try to figure out what are the key performance indicators that are out there. Like, how has it been studied? And, you know, as of 2011, I would say that the best resource, and probably still is the best resource for you know, scientific literature on female gymnasts, especially in terms of physical preparation outside of the gymnastics gym, would be William Sands. He was working at the USOC for a long time, I believe, with gymnastics. And, you know, one of the first ones that would show up would be, you know, repeat jumping for floor performance and the correlation that existed there. So that was like one of the first things. That was one of the first tests that we actually started doing, was like a 30-second jump test. And I still do that with the national team at this stage. But one of the things that I think I shifted a bit over the last bunch of years was, how do you get at improving that? Do you get at improving that by improving their jump, their endurance, which you're probably doing in the gymnastics setting all the time? Or do you improve that by improving the upper end, the kind of the floor or the ceiling, however you're looking at it, I guess. Those are opposite things. But what I'm saying is, like, if they can jump higher once and they have a good level of endurance, is that better than jumping lower and having a good level of endurance? I would say it's better to have that upper end ceiling that they're then going to come down from, versus having a low level that stays flat the whole time. So so what I'm getting at with that is, like, really having those like lower body power metrics being some of the things that I'm tracking and keeping an eye on, so that knowing that it's going to have a trickle down effect on the endurance side, just by having that one time ability be higher.
How do you frame the year of, say it's after a big Olympic event or a national event, and you have a window where it's going to be strength based? How do you plan your training steps towards, like, okay, the end goal is explosive body weight power? How do you build a periodization funnel towards that? Because I have my opinion, but I don't want to bias it. And then I kind of want to actually learn from you and what you do versus maybe what I suggest.
Okay. Yeah. Like really, I guess, high level overview of the periodization that I would think about from that sense. Starting out with, 4 to 6 weeks of sort of return to the weight room, slightly higher rep, but again, not really to max, but for some time under tension type work to, really build, tissue quality, tendon and ligament quality, that sort of stuff. And also regroove some patterns again, because, if we spent a bunch of time towards the end of the previous season, just like jumping and sprinting, maybe our squats are going to be a little bit shallow or whatever. So regrouping some movement patterns, 4 to 6, maybe even 8 weeks, depending on the person, coming back. Moving on from there, that's usually when I'll hit like a bit of a max strength type phase. Mm-hmm. So again, I depending on the person, some people like Ellie, again, at this point, we're really lucky. She's like 4 weeks and she usually goes back to wherever she had been for strength. Yep. But some people, it might take a little bit longer. So, somewhere in the 6, give or take, week range of sort of strength type work. And this is now when we're looking at, rep ranges around 5, give or take. Maybe we get down to 3s towards the end of the major lifts. And that's kind of, again, keeping a couple of reps in the tank, because we're not trying to stimulate too much muscle growth. So we're keeping some reps in the tank during that strength phase. And then I usually do, so now we're looking, 12 to maybe 16 weeks into the off season already. And then we're looking at, getting a little bit of power strength crossover. So I love to use contrast lifting, take advantage of that post-activation potentiation type phenomenon that's out there, which means essentially doing a heavy, but not maximal lift paired with a body weight explosive type movement, with a little bit of rest. So that, and the idea there is that, the heavy weight kind of primes the system for that body weight type movement to be a little bit more explosive, get a little bit more out of that. And so get into that type of stuff. And that's, again, that phase is usually a bit shorter. So 4 to 6 weeks tops.
Well, I think we've gone through so much awesome stuff. I guess my last parting question is, what are your pieces of, advice you have for the sport, coaches or whoever else, or mistakes that you made that you look back, 8 years ago when you started and you're like, oh, my bad. What are the things that you would give for recommendations? Because like I said, I think that this will be the biggest change we see moving forward in our world.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest mistakes that I've made are definitely some of the things that I've talked about in terms of what not to do. So, making sure you don't go too full on too fast. Making sure communication, if you're a strength coach or any other service provider working with a gymnastics athlete, making sure that the communication is kept up with the coaches. The coaches know what's going on. You've made a plan and agreed on a plan and agreed on some outcomes that you're going to measure and all that sort of stuff. I think that's huge. To create buy-in with the coaches. I think it's really easy to only focus on the athlete if that's the person who's coming to the weight room or coming to the gym all the time.